As Professor Zix9 completed his lecture with a dramatic sweep of his tentacles, he explained that the reason why humans are not allowed to take part in galactic warfare is because of that lesson. One of the students, who seemed to be a blue blob, raised a gelatinous appendage behind him. I was under the impression that humans were prohibited because they are feeble and backward. What exactly is going on? A tense twitch could be seen in the professor's eye as he paced around the room. The blowback? Kiki, a bird-like creature who looked like she was sitting on her desk, chirped that it was complex. Exists a potential danger? Are they not the case? In the next moment, Professor Zix produced a sound that sounded like air. I guess you are at an age where you are able to comprehend the reality. It all began in the year 3576, when the Great Zorian War took place. The students in the class, or at least those who were able to lean, were looking forward to what was about to happen. The Zorblans, who believed themselves to be of high intelligence, made the decision to use humans as cannon fodder. A rattling, dry sound was produced by the professor, who then laughed, before coming to the realization that they were very mistaken. An enthusiastic burble could be heard coming from the blowbacks, as if the people were going to be annihilated. What took place after that was... The lecturer continued to explain that humans have this charming little notion called war crimes, but the majority of animals simply fight until one side dies or surrenders. The students glanced at each other in amazement as the professor continued through his explanation. Kiki tilted her head in a manner that was considered to be noble, which caused Zix9 to giggle. They came up with a list of things that are impossible to do in combat because they are too harsh. To put it simply, you are completely missing the point, you darling June newborn. This was followed by the creation of a list. Every single thing that was not on that list was received with a collective gasp that resonated throughout the classroom, causing a tiny gravitational disruption. During the time when the Orions were celebrating their newly discovered primitive comrades, the humans were already 3 steps ahead of them. It wasn't only that they had fought the war, they had also scientifically ended it. Is that even a term it is now? Asked Eustace. It tapers gone, the professor said with a scowl on his face. The humans took a quick look at our standard-issue plasma guns and thought, nice toy, watch this next thing we know they were weaponizing. There is no way that black holes could have caused Kiki's hair to stand on end. It is also impossible. In spite of the fact that the term impossible is more of a challenge than a restriction for human beings, my wonderful pupil Zix let out a sigh. They referred to it as thinking outside the box, while we referred to it as breaking the rules of physics and generally accepted morality. A startled stillness pervaded the classroom as the students attempted to make sense of the information. There were a few pupils who sat with their heads cocked back, contemplating the situation. A robotics student suddenly beeped from the front row, interrupting the lecturer with a question. Because we humans are more interested in tales than in statistics, when one of our military commanders said that quantity had its own quality, we humans took it as a personal challenge to demonstrate that he was incorrect. The circuits of the robots came dangerously close to catching fire as they attempted to calculate that reasoning, but our hero Zix9 continued on, his voice gradually becoming a whisper. Once they weaponized our gleaming new faster-than-light drive, we turned our own technology against ourselves, and turned it against ourselves. In what ways might FTL be weaponized? During their conversation about the Yeet cannon, Kiki was struck by the professor's sagging eyes, which both enthralled and terrified her. It is possible that it refers to a war crime in their language, although I am not really sure what it signifies. There was a worried burble from Blowback, but at least everyone is safe now. Have you confirmed that the humans are confined to their own world? In his laughter, Zix9 made a sound that was devoid of any delight. The blob that represents my sweet summer has consented to remain on their world. They made a reference to taking a break in order to perform a Netflix binge, which sounded quite sinister. There was a tinge of relief felt by the class. A little earthquake was caused by the trembling that occurred throughout the classroom. The professor, whose tentacles were drooping from exhaustion, said, "The next time someone says humans aren't allowed to play Galactic Warfare because they're weak, remember that we didn't ban them, we begged them to stop." The students left the room, still perplexed from the revelation, and Professor Zix9 was still unable to comprehend what was going on. Zix9 slumped into his chair, and his tentacles began to massage his brain, which was in pain. It was necessary for the kids to be aware that the galactic rumor mill was getting out of hand, and that no one wanted a young extraterrestrial seeking to prove themselves by beginning a conflict with mankind. It was at that very moment when a soft chime interrupted his solemn receiving signal from. It was his desk computer that made the announcement that the professor had arrived. Even though his limbs were shaking and his heart was freezing, he went ahead and took the call. It was then that he saw a face on the TV that was smiling, and he smiled heartily. "Hey, Professor, it's been a long since we last saw one another. Captain Rodriguez, what brings me this pleasure?" The human grin became broader, as if it were even possible to have such a big smile. "I am just checking in with my favorite professor of xenoanthropology. I am curious as to why the children continue to feed their brains with terrible stories about us big, evil humans. My mind is a mess." At the same time as his chromatophores are going through a terrified rainbow, Zix9 stutters. Rodriguez chuckles, which causes the professor to get chills down his spine. "Make it happen, Professor. We are both aware that you have the classroom in a state of disarray. The next generation of potential threats is something that we need to keep a close watch on. The faith that you have in Zix9 has been decreasing ever since we installed it for you." Rodriguez chuckles at the Faraday cage, which is an example of pure human technology. We look forward to our little jokes. As he continued to speak with the professor, Rodriguez's face became significantly more subdued. The professor questioned with a frown, "Prof, we get it. We frighten the very daylights out of you guys. To tell you the truth, that's probably for the best. It keeps everyone on their toes." "So you're not intending to conquer the galaxy, are you?" Rodriguez sneered under his breath and said, "Do you have any clue how much paperwork it would involve?" "Not at all, we are not." There was a little nod of agreement from Zix9's tentacles, which brought about a slight relaxation. In addition, Rodriguez gave a nod. "As a side note, were you aware that we have started the process of populating our very own solar system? The progress that we are making on Mars is astounding, and we even have plans for Europa. However, that celestial body is safeguarded, and the Galactic Council has expressly forbidden any interference with possible alien life." The prof's eyes widened in fear as he heard this news. A dismissive wave was given by Rodriguez. "But here's the thing. We are the extraterrestrial life that is traveling to Europa." Zix9 recognized the beginnings of a migraine. Having to interact with people was very aggravating due to the fact that they lacked innovative thinking. As an alternative, they folded the box into an origami swan and put it as a cap over their head. "In any case," Rodriguez said with a pleasant tone, "I simply wanted to let you know that we were contemplating sending a delegation to the next meeting of the Galactic Council. We intended to make a few changes to the situation." Despite the fact that the professor's complexion had become sickly pale, Rodriguez smiled and said, "We are not coming as a military force." The prohibition, on the other hand, was still in effect. Professor Rodriguez reassured us in a suspiciously soothing tone, saying, "We will be on our best behavior, Scout's honor." Zix9 was pretty sure the hand gesture he used meant something completely different in human culture, but it was the same look that humans had just before they turned a black hole into a cosmic golf course. "We are coming as primitive friends, merely innocent people who are ready to learn from our neighbors who are at the advanced level of galactic civilization." In spite of his best efforts, he was unable to escape the impression that things were about to take an intriguing turn in the universe as he staggered out of his office. In the broad scheme of things, intriguing things were occurring, but the most scary potential of all was that, somewhere in space, a black hole had erupted, and, if humanity continued to defy the rules of physics and common reason, the Galactic Council would have to deal with them. This was the most terrifying prospect of all. Zix-9 was taken aback by the sound, which he mistook for human laughing. He was taken aback by the sound. After a period of 3 weeks, he found himself in the vast atrium of the offices of the Galactic Council, where he was feeling anxious and nervous. In the midst of a kaleidoscope of clicks, whistles, and pheromone releases, the room was filled with a flurry of activity, with representatives from thousands of different species freely interacting with one another. During the occasion, Kiki, who had been able to succeed in becoming Zix-9's helper, questioned aloud whether or not he was dreaming. There were knots in the prof bellowed. They untwined. Once the main doors in Strota were opened, the human delegation gave the impression that they were heading to the neighborhood shop to get some milk. This was in contrast to the fact that they were attending the most significant political meeting in the galaxy. Captain Rodriguez, who had a distinctive appearance that could be seen from orbit, placed himself at the front of the group. It was with the enthusiasm of a root canal treatment that he yelled out, "Sup, geeks!" His voice resounded with the excitement. The mob became completely quiet. Zix-9 experienced a spectrum of feelings as his chromatophores, which were located inside the suddenly silent room, went through a cycle. With an anxious clacking of his mandibles, an arachnoid ambassador crept forward and scurried onward. When Rodriguez remarked, "Esteemed human delegates, we are honored by your presence. We are just delighted to be here. We adore what you've done with the area, very spacey." The compound eyes of the arachnoids blinked in surprise as they praised the humans. Rodriguez's grin grew wider as he spoke. Zix-9 couldn't help but get the impression that he was being witness to a As he approached Professor Rodriguez with caution and made an effort to keep his voice quiet, a calamity occurred in slow motion. He said, "Captain, I must demand that you comply with this." "It is a pleasure to see you in person, Professor," Rodriguez replied with a smirk. "It's nice to see you. We've got the council meeting under control. In fact, we've brought a small presentation that you're going to adore," he said. Rodriguez confidently made his way to the center of the chamber, where he addressed the esteemed delegates of the galaxy. His voice assumed an unusually formal tone as he announced a proposal that would forever alter galactic politics. The chamber anxiously awaited Rodriguez's announcement, which had concluded with 3 uninhabited solar systems being transformed into an impromptu fireworks display. For dramatic effect, he paused and then said, "We want to join your Space Olympics." After a brief moment of silence, chaos ensued. A Jovian gasped. "How absurd!" screamed a group of psychic jellyfish. "What the fuck is an Olympic Games?" inquired a perplexed sentient Rock Rodriguez, who raised his hands in anticipation of the commotion to subside. "I know what you're thinking, but humans, you're barely out of your own solar system. How could you possibly compete?" Zix-9 felt a headache onset, and that wasn't the reason anyone. Contemplating that everyone was preoccupied with collective panic attacks, Rodriguez went on to say, "We've been training, and we believe we're ready for the big leagues. Plus, we've got a few new events to suggest." With a small device in his hand, he projected a hologram into the center of the chamber, showing what seemed to be a spacesuit-wearing individual, riding what seemed like a black hole. Kiki whispered, her feathers standing on end, and Rodriguez proudly announced that his team had been the first to successfully navigate the event horizon without getting spaghettified. Someone winked at Rodriguez and said, "Prof, this is us. We'll be on our best behavior and play nice." The arachnoid diplomat's mandibles clattered quickly, but the idea was impractical, illegal, and awesome. Rodriguez agreed with us, and we thought the same thing. As the chamber further descended into chaos, delegates were either passing out from stress or attempting to get in touch with their lobbyists. While he sank into his seat, Zix-9 couldn't help but wonder if the galaxy was prepared for humanity's unique brand of chaos, as he watched the most powerful beings in the galaxy reduced to a quarreling mess by a handful of insane humans and their ideas. Professor Zix-9 had a revelation. The galaxy hadn't banned humans from warfare because they were too dangerous, but because they made everything else look boring in comparison. As the Galactic Council chamber spiraled into an insanity of shouting, fainting, and spontaneous molting, Professor Zix-9 was abruptly pulled aside by a mischievous Captain Rodriguez. "Come on, Professor," Rodriguez said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Let's blow this popsicle stand." Prior to Professor Zix-9's protest, he was dragged out of the chamber, his tentacles flailing helplessly. They navigated through twisting corridors, passing confused onlookers. As the professor struggled to form a coherent sentence, Rodriguez's smile expanded to include the entire parking lot. Zix-9's eyes twisted in confusion as they burst through the doors into what seemed like a huge hangar. Lines upon lines of sleek spacecraft stretched out before them, and in the center of it all sat something that made Zix-9's heart skip a beat. It was a ship that looked like someone had stuffed a classic Earth muscle car with alien technology. Rodriguez took great pleasure in patting the shiny hood of the vehicle and exclaimed, "Meet the SS Hot Wheels." He then proceeded to explain that the vehicle was powered by pure audacity and had a sight of quantum improbability, which enabled it to reach light speed in 3 seconds. Rodriguez's mouth dropped open in awe as he listened to this explanation. As soon as he pressed a button, the car ship began playing what Zix-9 identified as old Earth rock music at an ear-splitting volume. The professor recoiled in shock, his sensory organs being overwhelmed. Rodriguez shrugged and said, "Probably not, but hey, that hasn't stopped us before. We wanted to take her for a spin." Just as Zix-9 was about to respond, a resounding "No!" in at least 17 different languages, Kiki stormed into the hangar, bringing with her a complete and utter chaos and feathers. The professor squawked at the council, expressing her frustration that they are going insane. Rodriguez offered a helpful suggestion, and the Kiki nodded frantically. They are calling for an emergency vote to decide whether to surrender to humanity in order to prevent any future incidents involving cosmic sports. Zix-9 felt faint, as if this was the end of galactic civilization. The professor added. Rodriguez, on the other hand, looked thoughtful, saying, "I didn't see that coming. Usually it takes at least 3 of them." Just so everyone knows, our presentations are planned before the white flag is raised. The human captain looked a little embarrassed, but that was about it. We were hoping for a friendly sports competition where we could flaunt our skills, meet new people, and maybe even inadvertently change the laws of physics. As always, Kiki's beak would fall open, and Rodriguez would dismissively mention instances like the time we turned Jupiter into a giant mood ring, or when we sent Morse code using a pulsar. Messages across the galaxy, simply good, clean fun. Zix-9 felt a migraine coming on, Captain. You don't seem to grasp the seriousness of the situation. The Galactic Council is in utter chaos. Centuries of meticulously laid diplomatic plans are crumbling before our eyes, and all because you wanted to add some spice, Rodriguez offered. But hey, at least no one's at war, right? The professor reluctantly conceded that the humans had a point, and the galaxy was in a tumult, but not a violent one. Just as Zix-9 was beginning to wonder for the umpteenth time if the universe might have been better off if humans had remained on our little blue planet binge-watching Netflix, alarms started blaring throughout the hangar. Rodriguez's eyes lit up with excitement as he said, "Oh, looks like the after-party is starting. Come on, you two, let's go see what kind of trouble we can get into." Launch seizure was one possibility. Instead of metal damage, speared out of nowhere. As they hurried back towards the council chamber, the question resurfaced. Perhaps the universe would have been better off if humans had just stayed on our little blue planet, binge-watching Netflix. As Rodriguez entices a group of silicon-based beings with the promise of extreme terraforming sports, the professor comes to the realization that the galaxy might never be the same. However, he begins to wonder if this is really a bad thing, considering that humans often argue that navigating a black hole is more efficient than shooting for the stars. With the Galactic Council getting ready to welcome its newest and most chaotic members, Professor Zix-9 braces himself for a future that will undoubtedly be filled with terrifying moments, thrilling moments, and, most importantly, never-ending. As Rodriguez guided Zix and Kiki back to the council chamber, the professor couldn't help but feel that the universe was on the verge of collapsing. Peering through the doors, they beheld a scene that could only be described as orderly chaos. Delegates from 1,000 worlds were engrossed in passionate debates, Tentacles fluttered, Tenny twitched, and in one peculiar instance, a gaseous being changed colors. In the middle of what appeared to be a living disco ball, a woman with silver hair pulled back into a non-nonsense bun spoke to the crowd as if they were having a casual conversation about the weather, rather than the impending doom of galactic civilization. Rodriguez grinned and said, "No, just introducing our new ride, Ambassador Chen to Professor Zix-9, and his assistant Kiki. The reason we're all here is we haven't managed to conquer half the galaxy just yet." Ambassador Chen rolled her eyes. "Flirt will get you everywhere," she said to the captain. "Excuse me, but I'm currently trying to prevent an interstellar incident," she said with a dismissive wave. "Oh, that little misunderstanding turned out to be that surrender in Arcturian sign language looks a lot like let's party in Balgian interpretive dance. We've resolved that, and for the most part we've brought in a translator droid who appeared to be just one paradox away from—" Rodriguez clapped his hands in a show of great excitement, but before Chen could respond, a booming voice resounded throughout the chamber. "We accept your challenge, humans!" All eyes turned to see Ambassador Corlix, a massive, tentacled being slithering forward. The Spylop-Podian Collective is renowned for its unparalleled spatial awareness and ability to multitask with up to 27 limbs simultaneously. Corlix's 17 eyes gleamed with excitement. "And your cosmic sports intrigue us. We propose a contest, our best against yours. If we win, you agree to tone down your enthusiasm for galactic remodeling." Rodriguez's eyebrows shot up. "And we win," the Spylop-Podian tentacles wide. In what might have been a shrug, "Name your price, human." A hush fell over the chamber as everyone waited for Rodriguez's response. Zix-9 felt his heart racing. This was it, the moment that would decide the fate of the galaxy. Would the humans demand unlimited access to restricted technology? The rights to terraform uninhabited worlds? A monopoly? Regarding black hole manipulation, Rodriguez nervously stroked his chin before breaking into a wide grin. "If we win, you have to host the next intergalactic barbecue cook-off," he said, his smile growing wider. "Every species is invited, no diet restrictions left behind, and we'll even throw in some recipes for squid dishes." The subsequent silence was so profound that you could have heard a cork drop. "What?" Krolak asked, his tentacles twitching in bewilderment. "You heard me," Rodriguez said, his grin widening even wider. "So, what do you think? You haven't lived until you've tried baby back ribs slow-cooked in the radiative heat of a blue supergiant." Rodriguez shrugged, while Ambassador Chen, known for cultural exchanges, pinched the bridge of her nose and mumbled something that sounded suspiciously like, "This is why we can't have nice solar systems." Kur-Al-X, on the other hand, appeared more interested in a culinary contest than in military might or technological supremacy. As the Spylopodian pondered this, rumbles of interest started to ripple through the crowd, and other species began to chime in. The professor asked Rodriguez quietly, "You planned this, didn't you?" as the captain winked. "Let's just say we found that nothing brings people together quite like the promise of good food and a killer party." Now, if you'll pardon the pun, Zix listened as the tension dissolved into enthusiastic chatter about grilling techniques and marinades. Even Kiki got in on the action, enthusiastically describing something called a seed cake to the group of silicon-based life forms. "Apologies, but I have to go explain what s'mores are to a group of people who are really into this idea. It might take some time, but while Rodriguez waited in the now buzzing crowd, excited about the possibility of an intergalactic potluck, Zix-9 felt a strange sensation. It took him a moment to identify it, but he hoped that maybe the humans' chaotic approach to galactic diplomacy wasn't so bad after all. After all, who needs war when there are barbecue techniques to perfect and recipes to exchange? Meanwhile, he watched Ambassador Chen expertly negotiate the diplomatic. Zix-9 couldn't help but chuckle at the strict no sentient ingredients clause in the cook-off rules. The galaxy might never be the same, but at least it would be well fed. Who knows? Maybe in the middle of the enormous cosmic barbecue that the universe was about to become, they'd finally discover the answer to life, the universe, and everything. At least they'd have a good start. The Galactic Council chamber was buzzing with excitement over the upcoming intergalactic barbecue. Cook-Off Professor Zix-9 was caught in a whirlwind of activity. He had been appointed to the Xenobiological Dietary Concerns Subcommittee, a position he wasn't sure he had volunteered for. Now, regarding the methane breathers from Epsilon Eridani, Kiki chirped as she scrolled through a holographic checklist. Should they be placed near the plasma grills or the cryogenic coolers? Zix-9's tentacles nodded in concentration, but neither option was ideal. Perhaps they should be seated next to the silicon-based life forms, where they can bond over their shared appreciation of... I understand that you guys don't eat in the traditional sense, but trust me, you haven't lived until you've tried to absorb the essence of a perfectly smoked brisket. One of the energy beings flickered in what might have been confusion. Captain Rodriguez, though, seemed to be engaged in an intense debate across the room with a group of crab nebularers. How could we survive on pure radiation, Captain? What the captain means is that we will work closely with your nutritionists to ensure a safe and enjoyable experience for all attendees. As the preparations continued, more and more species got into the spirit of things. The hive mind of Beta Centauri offered to handle logistics. Rodriguez interrupted by waving a finger, saying, "That's quitter talk. We'll figure it out. Maybe we can irradiate it or something." Ambassador Chen overheard this and quickly interjected. The chronowares of the temporal expanse, who boasted that they could coordinate 1 million drones to create the galaxy's largest buffet line, proposed a dishes throughout history theme and promised to retrieve delicacies from various extinct civilizations. After a strict reminder about the no sentient ingredients rule, even the very reserved void dwellers, who were made entirely of dark matter, showed interest in attending when asked how they intend to take part in a food event. While taking a break from planning, Zix-9 pondered to Kiki, "Maybe the humans are onto something here," and Kiki tilted her head curiously, asking, "What do you mean?" The ambassador simply replied, "We'll bring the dark chocolate." Then, he vanished in a puff of gravitational lensing. As the day progressed, Zix-9 began to enjoy the chaos. It was strangely refreshing to watch the galaxy's most powerful beings argue passionately about marinade recipes and grill temperatures, rather than territorial disputes and arms races. A disturbance near the chamber's center was interrupted by Ambassador Curl X, just as Professor Zix-9 was about to respond to it. Half of these species refused to even acknowledge each other's existence just a day before the main event. Kiki nodded in agreement, her feathers fluffing in amusement. However, I am still uncertain about the human insistence on what is formally known as a Koke contest, following the presentation of the main event. The expression on Rodriguez's face was one of intense concentration, as he demanded that Rodriguez agree to hold the event's desert portion in the neutron star's gravity well, where density variations would produce flavor profiles that were unlike anything in the known universe. Rodriguez, whose face was flushed from exertion, forced a smile and said, "If I were to win, you would have to sample my Aunt Mabel's 5-alarm chili. Rest assured we will supply it." This was all part of the arm wrestling match between Rodriguez and the Ceopodian collective. Fire extinguishers as the two continued their friendly sparring with a slew of extraterrestrial dignitaries cheering them on. Zix-9 felt a tap on his shoulder. He glanced over to see Ambassador Chen standing by his side, her smile wide and her expression exaggerated. "This is definitely not what I had in mind when you humans proposed joining the Galactic Society," Zix-9 admitted, his confusion visible as he nodded. "It's like, we never do anything the way anyone expects." Just to back up her claim, the crowd went wild with cheers. Rodriguez, who had apparently won the match, was being carried on the shoulders of multiple anti-gravity beings. "All right, folks," he shouted over the din, his fists pumping in triumph. "Who's ready to plan the galaxy's biggest potluck?" The room went wild again with enthusiastic chatter and increasingly ridiculous food suggestions. Zix-9? A group of telepathic fungus were avidly debating the possibility of psychic wine tasting, and he couldn't help but laugh as he watched them. If this was humanity's approach to interstellar diplomacy, then the cosmos would be in for quite a treat, both literally and metaphorically.